From Puritanism to the Enlightenment introduction. The Renaissance is over, and if you've noticed from time to time, from unit to unit, the years don't necessarily sync up exactly. Like one ends at 1620, and the next one starts at 1620. There's kind of some overlap and such. A lot of this, they keep track of this stuff by the person in charge, the monarch in charge. When we get to the Victorian age, that's because of Queen Victoria. The Renaissance, a lot of that is mainly Queen Elizabeth, but also has a little bit of her cousin James I. And this particular time really has like two separate stories that are going on. In the Renaissance, remember we spent a lot of time, or I did, talking about Henry VIII and his wives, and that was like, oh, okay, well that's nice, it's soap opera, but yet how the fallout of that dealt with the religion, and we saw how the religion played out, and all the people being killed, and caused the stone or the snowball to slowly get bigger and bigger as it rolls down the hill. We see that even continue in this particular piece, or this particular time period, 1620s and 30s and 40s, regarding the Puritans. Now, I think you've heard of Puritans. Remember doing the Crucible, that junior year? The people that came over on the Mayflower. Do you know why they came over from the Mayflower? It wasn't to go exploring. It was to practice their faith and their religion. The Puritans that came to America came from Holland, but they were transplants from England, and they had escaped England because they wanted to be able to have their own, not necessarily have their own religion, but be able to practice it without their, some outside influence. They caused, as you'll see when we talk about it and as you read it, they caused ultimately the Civil War, their Civil War during this particular time period, a fracturing. The king was dissolved. The parliament was put in charge. There was no monarch for a handful of years. And when you think of England, I don't know about you, but I kind of always think of, king or queen. Nowadays, they don't have much power, do they? They're just really kind of a figurehead, okay? They're not really lawmakers. They're just really kind of the face of the money and face of their empire, I guess you could say. But the story really starts off here with James I, who was Elizabeth's successor. He was the one that Macbeth was written for, which a handful of you still got wrong. I don't know how many times I had to say it during Macbeth that this was written for James I, and there was a shout-out, a cameo, when he was in the line of apparitions and blah, 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 and we talked about that. But anyways, the divine right of the king. If you look there in that first column, it says that when James I succeeded to the English throne, he firmly upheld the principle of the divine right of kings, the belief that the regent derives power directly from God. Okay? So he believed that his power, that his rule, his right to rule was given to him by God, was passed down by God, and so on. Now, this is where the problem happens. Parliament starts to question, the power that the king ultimately has. Like, I don't think you should have all this power. Let us take some of this power from you. Let us do some of what needs to be done. And he refuses to give up any power at all. Okay? He refuses to give up any at all. And in doing so, he believed it wasn't just because, I want my power, which might have been a subtext of it. But he felt that I got my power from God. Who am I to give it away? It would be a slight against my religion and my God to give away any of my power. Okay? So do you see where the friction's going to be? When he passed, Parliament was hoping that his son, Charles I, was going to be different. Okay, we have a new king. Hopefully he's a little bit different, and we can kind of get the ball rolling with this, taking some of the power from the king and putting it in the courts and having it, play out more of a normal situation. And Charles I was just like Daddy. Okay, he did it like Daddy. And that's where the schism happened. That's where the break occurred and civil war broke out. Because Charles believed that because of his belief that he would be committing a grave sin in surrendering part of his authority, Charles disregarded Parliament's opinions on economic spending and commanded his subjects to observe a form of Anglican ritual that was offensive to Puritans and other dissidents. And so Puritans are starting to have things imposed upon them. Okay, and those that didn't stick around and fight, fleeing and running away is the wrong word, but choosing to leave might be a little bit softer term, in order to practice their own faith. Okay, so for this particular time period, this is the story. Okay, when you think back to the Enlightenment, you're like, what's the Enlightenment? What's the Puritans? You need to think back about this struggle. Okay, so the Puritans fight a war with Charles and such. Charles is defeated, and the Puritans take over, and they do not make a king. Okay, Charles the first son, Charles II, is exiled. He lives away, out of the country. The rightful king, successor to his father, and we have a gentleman named Cromwell. Okay, they call him the Lord Protector of the country. He was the individual who really led the assault against Charles the First, and against, I don't want to say against England because they're all England, but really against the king and the rightful people that were in charge. And so upon winning, the Commonwealth said, you know what, hey, you should be in charge. Now I've kind of alluded to the Puritan Rule back in the Shakespearean time. But some of the things they did, they closed theaters, they banned dancing and music, they caused all religious icons to be destroyed as graven images, and forbade the celebration of Christmas. Okay? An enjoyable time during this time period to live? Probably not. If you were to read some of these other pages, you would get fined for spitting in the streets or swearing. You could be fined. It was during this era where the Puritans knocked down or closed the theaters. They knocked down the Globe after it was rebuilt because of the fire and such, but they knocked it down and put up apartments and such. And the Globe wasn't rebuilt until 1997, I think it was. And not really on the same spot, just down the road. But anyway, so we have this absence of a monarch. Okay, the Lord Protector dies. His son is incapable of running the country, of running and doing what needs to be done. And so Parliament says, let's invite Charles II back. Let's talk to him, okay, and let's restore our monarchy with the changes that we wanted a long time ago. Okay, so Charles II comes back, becomes king, and this is what's important, because you might hear this term, you will hear this term, the restoration. What is that? Well, we're restoring something. If you restore a painting, you bring it back to its brilliance, right, to some degree, or some artwork or a table. They're restoring the monarchy. They're restoring, what everybody came to think of English rule at the time. And now we have a king again, okay? And they keep having kings from here on out. But this was a weird schism, a break in the timeline of English history where there wasn't one for a while. And that's kind of strange, and so that's why it's important. The Restoration, when he came back, he brought back art. He brought back theater. He brought back dancing. Women were now allowed to be on stage, because remember, it was illegal at the time, or beforehand. Men had to dress up and such. And so a lot of things changed, a lot of things, and everybody started to think differently and act differently. And after, I'm not sure the year, 12 years, 14 years, 15, 16 years of Cromwell and of the Puritans, and now everybody could flourish and be artistic again. And that is what brings on the Enlightenment. So when you think of the Puritans, think about what they did to the country, what happened, that Civil War and such, but ultimately that led to the Restoration and Enlightenment. Okay? So try to keep those phrases, accordingly in your mind. The last paragraph there, that the Enlightenment was a European philosophical and literary movement that in England is often called the Age of Reason. So books and such call it the Enlightenment. They may call it the Age of Reason. You might have heard of either of those statements. It is characterized by a profound faith in the power of human reason and a devotion to clarity of thought. Other hallmarks of the age were a skeptical attitude toward traditional religion. So we start to see people not necessarily go against religion, but a little bit more of, I'm not fully behind what you're saying. I don't 100% believe. I'm a little skeptical, a little bit leery on that subject. This is going to start growing and manifesting as we get going through the next decades and hundreds of years, leading into 150 years, 200 years from now, when Darwin shows up, and he caused a big controversy. But we have individuals. We start reading about the humanist movements and things where people start putting a lot of faith in what humans can do and not give so much credibility to God and their religions and such. So we really see the seeds of that starting to be planted here in this chapter. So very important, even though it's it doesn't take up many pages in our book. The historical significance is pretty overwhelming. The big ideas 1, 2, and 3 I've already spoken about in detail. Here's some more information. The first is Puritanism and the Civil War, talking about what the religion was like, the conflict, more specifics. I already talked about them, but you might want some more details. More information about the Civil War, Puritan's rule, so when Cromwell was in charge, and so on. The Restoration on Big Idea 2, like I said, that's when Charles II comes back in, and it's on. I mean, he comes in almost on a parade. Okay, and if you read any of the backstory, he came and he forgave the judges. He forgave the people who, upon his father losing, Cromwell had him beheaded, and he died. Obviously, okay, you take off someone's head. So Cromwell's dead now, but Oliver II, Oliver, where did that come from? That was Oliver Cromwell. Charles II came back. He's the new king. He forgave the people. Okay, good. Oh, mea culpa, everything's fine. Let's move on. Except for Cromwell. Did you read what he did to the body of Cromwell? He dug him up, publicly beheaded him, and dumped him in an unmarked grave. So he held a little bit of resentment, I think, towards a little bit of upset about his daddy being killed the way he was. So he forgave everybody, but he wanted to take out his revenge on one person and, well, I guess one corpse. How do you like that job, having to dig up the body so you could, knowing what's going to... That would just be wrong. Anyway, so the Restoration, more information there going on about Charles II, and some really interesting stuff to help build the story. And the Big Idea 3, those of you that are still confused a little bit about the Age of Reason or what the Enlightenment truly is, here's some more information and introduction, their observation of nature, and just sit back and watch, and you can really see what's going on and see God in nature and things of that caliber. Scientific review, the rule of the ancients. Satire is during this particular time period, and that's what we're going to talk about next with Jonathan Swift.